built into it, lovely cameras, cinematic lenses, lovely. So I'll let you just watch that. You might all be picking up on things already, okay? So yes, we have the fancy force plates upstairs and things like that. We're going to also talk about all of these interventions and all of these ways of assessing an athlete. You can do it with various levels of equipment and technology. Okay, so even if you just have a phone camera, you could do that. You could get side on someone on a treadmill, or even on the track if you've got appropriate distance. Have a look at that. So when we get into the kinematic analysis first, many of you will have seen a kinegram before, so I'm just going to go through this anyway. A kinegram is a series of steel frames in different positions of that running strike. So these are kind of in line with what a lot of people use in the literature. The Altis method uses a similar kind of kinegram strategy. I don't know if many of you have read Chris Brammer's research. He's produced this new SMAS method, Sprint Mechanics Assessment Score, where it allows you to score someone's mechanics. So toe off, we're probably teaching you to suck eggs here, but toe off is kind of the last frame before we leave the floor, essentially. Okay. So what we're looking at here is, have we got excessive hip extension with a straight knee? We're maybe starting to look at the trunk and pelvis. Is it going into anterior tilt, or quite a lot of lordosis at the lower back? We're sometimes going to look at this thigh separation angle or this projection angle. Well, obviously that will depend on different speeds as well of running, so we're not necessarily going to look at that because we've got to look at it as an endurance runner. So that's your toe off. Then we go to max vertical projection, which is when their centre of mass is at its highest, so we take a still of that. At this position we're looking at various things. Again, we're looking at lumbo-pelvic control, lordotic postures potentially. Is there too much excessive anterior tilt? We're also then starting to look at this trail leg and seeing, is there signs of excessive backside mechanics? So depending on speed as well sometimes, but if this is at 24k an hour, by the way, so this is 60-second 400 pace, 3:45, 1500 metre pace. So race pace for this 1500 metre run. Yeah. So is his heel? Is his heel? I'm going to click off that. Yeah. Is his heel above the knee? That might be a suggestion that he's kicking back up too much. And then we're looking at, is he rotating too much as well? So if from the side we can if we can see that opposite shoulder or the opposite upper arm, that may be a little sign of some slight over rotation. We're also looking at this if he's starting to actually prepare that ankle. We're trying to come into some dorsiflexion, so we start getting some pre-tension on the calf musculature, so then when we whack it into the floor, we've got that stretch shorten cycle ready to stiffen upon the floor. Then we come to late swing. So late swing phase is essentially the frame where the knee angle stops extending, really. So when the heel is at its most far forwards, okay? In this position, we are looking at several things. Again, trunk and pelvis control, any excessive lordotic postures or anterior tilt. We're then looking at that thigh separation angle, because that's going to start telling us around is there potentially some overstride mechanics, but also is there some excessive backside? Is he leaving that knee behind? And probably by late swing, we want that knee to be much further forward. So I'm giving you some clues here already. Okay, we want it to be nearer under his hips. Okay. Next position, touchdown. So the first frame that he's touching the floor. When he touches the floor, we want to look at the foot and ankle. Are they a heel striker? Are they a very forefoot striker? If there's a big gap between the heel and the floor, or a big gap between the toe and the floor, we can say yes, there's probably some excessive, or well, it's certainly a consideration we need to look at, because it will affect the stresses going through the body. Okay, this guy, obviously you can see, is quite a forefoot dominant, so he's going to demand a lot from his calf musculature. Yeah, if you're a bit of a heel foot striker, you can demand a little bit more from the quadriceps and the knee. We're looking at the forward lean, the trunk inclination angle here. So if you're pretty flex forward, combined maybe over 15 degrees, some of the literature suggests, and you are also touching down in front of your centre of mass, that could be classed as some overstride mechanics as well there. So if your point of contact is more than a foot distance away from that centre line of the hip, then that could be classed as a bit of an overstride as well. So he's on the edge there, he's probably okay. You've got a subtle forward lean. And then the final position is mid-stance, okay? So what we're looking at here is mid-stance is a position where his ankle is directly under his centre of mass, so his hip. So we take that position there. We're looking at a few things here in terms of how much deformation is there excessive deformation in terms of that knee angle, that ankle angle. You might be able to tell this if their knee is excessively over their toes, so they might have touched down but then lose that stiffness and go into quite a lot of dorsiflexion if they haven't got that muscle tendon stiffness. We also, if we have a view of the other side, we might be looking at the contralateral hip. Is there any hip drop in there? Or are they being able to be nice and strong and keep that pelvis nice and strong? So you can sometimes see that, you might see that on the video, but you also need to look at the other side for that as well. I thought it was also worth me showing this view for this athlete. Probably don't need to explain what's going on here. Obviously I had to choose some things there's potentially things going wrong or some obvious faults. So you can see what's happening there. His foot upon contact is quite turned out on that right foot, so everted, and then he goes into quite a lot of pronation on that foot relative to his left a little bit. So a consideration. None of these things on their own are always terrible, or bad. We just need to, and this is important that you discuss this as a team, because if we're going to try and put an intervention in place, we need to consider the other knock-on effects of changing mechanics. We need to look at how that, so we need to discuss as a team, look at it, are they continually getting injured in a certain tissue, so it may be advantageous to tweak those mechanics if we can, or do we need to tweak their mechanics to make them faster or more efficient? But sometimes messing around too much can actually create problems because they are conditioned to those mechanics. So when we get into the kinematic analysis, so I'm just going to give a bit of a summary of that. So what I saw, and probably a lot of you did, is some evidence of excessive backside mechanics in that athlete. His heel of his trailing was slightly above the knee at max vertical projection, and that isn't even at maximal sprinting speed. So he's pretty kicking up the back. He had a relatively large thigh separation angle in late swing. Okay, so his knee was still behind his glutes. That's a nice way of looking at that in that position. Late swing is the knee behind the glutes. And he still had a large separation, so he's been a bit lazy with that leg for some reason. At touchdown, okay, so he had probably, I think I measured it, it was around 37 degrees that he had at the thigh separation. So we want that to be much closer. His knee, if you don't have any, I just use a phone app sometimes, but we can get this from the biomechanics guys, but you can use a phone app, take that and just get a little app measurement. But another way of looking at it is his knee was still behind his back, so we definitely don't want the knee behind the back at touchdown. So that's one kind of problem, don't know. And then the other kind of noticeable thing that we all noticed was that everted foot on contact and a real large amount of pronation. So when he goes from contact through to mid-stance and toe off eventually. So check the time, see how we're doing. Plenty of time. Perfect. So that's the kind of kinematic analysis done. Anybody can do that with an iPhone. If you have biomechanists at your disposal, you can obviously tap into them to get those numbers, but we can look at some of those variables as well by using things like the SMAS method, and things like that. So now we'll dive into the kinetic analysis. So this is everything to do with forces, basically. And we're lucky that we can actually get this from the biomechanists, Yankai and Brian, people like that, who are much more adept at these things than us. But I'm just going to pick out a few variables that I'm noticing. And on this slide, you know, we could really go into detail, but I'm just going to pick out a few related to what I think is related to that right foot, that right ankle, because we're seeing some slight asymmetries. So we're seeing that right foot is less vertical impulse, yeah, so is less, that is the overall force that he applies when he's on the ground. So the under the graph, that force time curve, it's that force over time. So he's producing less overall force on that right foot. So that spring-like mechanism might not be as of his foot. An ankle and Achilles calf complex might not be as effective as his left side. His push-up rate's down. His leg stiffness is down, so he deforms in terms of more greater flexion angles, triple flexion. And I think potentially could be because of that ankle. It's not as effective. And his propulsive impulse is also a little bit down on that side. Yeah, only little bits, but you know, he's developed these mechanics, I think, over years, and he's quite. Sorry, I've got some kind of question. Is there any questions at this stage? Okay, so continuing the kinetic analysis, I'm only going to draw out, pull a few more. So we've looked at definitely his right side. There's some asymmetries going on, and I think that's because of the ankle. We also had the other issue, which was he was quite backside with his mechanics. So we now need to think, well, why is he backside? Often people are excessively backside because they spend too much time on the floor, okay? And the reason they're doing that is so they can extend, and they're pushing for longer. So often their contact times are too long, because they really want to spend a lot of time on the floor and use their hip extensors to get that horizontal propulsion rather than just popping off the ground. So often it's because, you know, they're using that musculature in the posterior chain to push them forward rather than a nice efficient spring-like mechanism to bounce forward. However, if we look at these details here at 24k an hour, he's relatively normal really in terms of his contact time. So there's these numbers at the side are just normative values that Brian has provided with us for us. So he's relatively normal, so he's not spending excessive amounts of time on the floor. And we could pull out all the detail here, but his aerial duration is also pretty normal as well. It's quite good. In fact, his contact times are a little bit crisper, you know, a bit shorter than normal at 24k an hour for an athlete. So he's quite springy, he's quite bouncy because he's getting off the floor fairly quick and he's flying in the air for a decent amount of time. Okay? Whether that goes in the right direction, we're not discussing that, but he is fairly springy as an athlete, okay? So that right limb, he's not pushing and dragging out the back too much. So that then gives us the question, why is he excessively backside? Okay, so why? And for me, we need to look into that. I'm going to show you how to look into that. He's just been lazy somehow. He's been lazy, he's leaving it behind, and he's not bringing that knee through and switching limbs quick enough. So we need to look into that.
Okay, so quickly.
Yeah.
What's the PB for this guy?
PB?
Yeah.
Oh, it'd be around that pace actually.
3:49.
Yeah.
Is that quicker than
A little bit quicker, yeah. So it might feel a bit quick. And actually, he does run like this. On the treadmill, sometimes it exacerbates that a little bit, but we know he does run like this anyway. So it's a good question. Yeah, sure.
Is he injured?
Not at the moment, no. I don't think.
He's got injury.
What time of year was it as well?
What time of year was this? When was it? December, I think, something like that. Yeah. He's not injured, however, he has had history of right calf strain. Okay, so yeah, there's something to be said there. So if we're going to then look at him, what else do we need to look at? So we're trying to think of a holistic intervention for this individual. If the team agrees that we need to address this, so we're trying to give you a little bit of a framework from this. This is when strength and conditioning comes in a little bit. So we would look at all these kind of four things. Have they got sufficient range of motion for what they're trying to achieve? Okay. Have they got the dynamic force characteristics? Are they capable of expressing the force within the time constraints of the running stride? Have they got strength, enough strength? Can they produce enough force in the first place? You can't produce a force quickly unless you can produce that force in the first place, you know. Have they got the strength also to control the limbs so that they can, you know, show lots of control in those postures, those dynamic postures? And then have they got the capacity? So can they repeatedly achieve these positions and repeatedly tolerate or express these ground contact forces? So that is kind of our framework that I'm going to go through. Mai will also go through a very similar framework with his analysis. So, if we were to look at this athlete in particular, we, as S&C coaches, we have quite a big battery of tests really, because we want to look at everything. But if we were to hone in on certain assessments on this athlete based on their biomechanics, their kinematic and their kinetic data, we'd probably be looking at, from a range of motion perspective, we don't need to look too much around the hips because he seems to have plenty of hip extension. He's not kicking into any anterior tilt or lordosis. He's quite still around there. Plenty of hip extension. But what we need to look at is ankle range of motion. Yeah, so you know, to see if that is affecting that contact there. So we're going to run through a few little tests. So I'm going to use mine just to show you a really simple way. This might be touching on to Skok, but how to measure that. So all you need is a tape measure. This is a knee to wall test. So mine's going to go toe against the ground. His hips are going to be square and his heel stays on the floor. And he pushes his knee over the middle of the toes and keeps coming back until that heel's coming off the floor. So he maybe needs to come a little bit further forward. And I'm going to measure his ankle dorsiflexion as 8 centimeters. Okay? So there's lots of kind of opinion on this around what are the targets. Should it be at least 40 degrees, or we can measure it in degrees, or should it be in centimeters? Usually in our populations of elite runners we like to see somewhere between 6 and 10 centimeters. Now funnily enough, all the elite runners we work with are all quite stiff. You know, it's a chicken and the egg scenario, or a natural selection potentially, but they generally, the best runners that we know, usually have quite restricted ankle dorsiflexion, which probably gives them that muscle, that stiffness upon contact and makes them a bit more efficient as well. Doesn't mean that we want to be too stiff, because for this runner, we've actually measured his ankle dorsiflexion and he's extremely stiff. He's probably 1 or 2 centimeters. So what he's doing is he's turning out to artificially give himself some dorsiflexion. And so he is everting and pronating so that he can get a little bit more dorsiflexion on contact. But that isn't really efficiently using that spring-like mechanism. So in terms of interventions, we might want to look at that. He's actually got naturally just very, very stiff ankles bilaterally, but one's worse, and actually we need to keep on top of that, because at times if training load is high and that dorsiflexion drops a little bit, then he's definitely at risk of Achilles, calf injuries and stuff like that. He's a very forefoot dominant runner as well, so we need to make sure he is robust to that too. Then from a dynamic force perspective, a key thing that we would look at in the gym would be single leg reactive strength index. Okay, so this is known as the 10-5 test. So the 10-5 test, I'll explain it and then I'll let Mai demonstrate. You can do it on force plates. It gives you loads of nice fancy metrics, but you can also do it on a phone app. Yeah, simple as that. The 10-5 test, we would do a counter movement jump, a big jump into the air, and then upon contact we'd do 10 pogo jumps. Yeah, so the test, we're asking the athlete to get on the floor as fast as they can, but also jump as high as they can, and that gives them a better score. So it's a good indication of their elasticity and their power. Okay, so you can do double leg if you want, Mai. Okay, so we would say, yeah, let's demo a 10-5 test. Oh, there you go. And he stayed on the floor space. Bravo, well done. So the 10-5 test, we're calculating something called reactive strength index. There's other metrics we can delve into, But one that we like to use is flight time divided by contact time. So the higher they fly, obviously the better, because they've got lots of propulsion, and if their contact time is nice and low, they're gonna also be able to hit the floor and bounce just that little bit further each strike. So that's a number we're going to look at. For single leg, we're looking at a number of about 1, like a 1 to 1. Yeah. For double leg, we're looking at targets of beyond 2, 2.5 for good runners. Now, it's really difficult to give you actually standards. I don't like doing this really, because we've seen so many like elite runners, but there's huge differences between an 800 meter runner like a Keely Hodgkins who's very powerful, very elastic, versus a marathon runner who doesn't need to be, so there's a lot of context behind some of these. So I don't like it when they say people say this is good, poor and average. We actually need to, there's context behind it, okay? And we need to relate it to their mechanics. Is it a problem within their mechanics, as well? For this guy, he's nice and bouncy anyway. We saw that from his kinetic values on the treadmill and the force plate. So he's pretty good at this anyway. So we don't need to consider that. Strength. We would want to look at an isometric push. So particularly we're wanting to look at his ankle plantar flexors, because his calves and Achilles are doing a lot of work with being a 4-foot runner. So one is a run specific ankle isometric. So mine is just off the floor, just in plantar flexion. His forefoot is directly under the bar, and his knee is nice and straight. So the main contribution is his calf musculature here. So the test is simply a 6-second maximal push, okay? And we look at peak force to see can they generate good enough peak force. We may also look at, if we have force plates, like their peak force at say 150 milliseconds, because that's around the time they're going to be spending on the floor, or 100 milliseconds. So we go 3, 2, 1, push, and you stiff into the ground as much as you can, okay? Now, if that was down, so again, for someone like this athlete here, we're looking at targets of 2.5 times body weight plus, if they are a sprinter, we're going to be looking at more than that. An endurance runner, probably we do want them to be at least 2.5 because of the forces they're going to be experiencing when they're running. So we'd be looking at that. This guy is pretty stiff, pretty springy, pretty strong in his calves, but we need to make sure that they are strong enough to tolerate those repeated forces of being a very 4-foot runner. Okay. The other area of strength I want to look at is hip flexor, his hip flexion. Okay, because as I said, he's been lazy. For some reason, we don't know why until we do these tests. He's being lazy. He's leaving that leg behind, and for some reason, he's not switching it through quick enough. And it's not because he's over pushing, he's just leaving it behind, okay? So we need to look at, does he have the force initially to be able to control his leg, and then has he got the force and the control to be able to whip it through quick? So we need to look at like these dynamic exercises as well to see if he can do that efficiently. So some tests that we might do for hip flexion is, there's various ways. Do you want to do it supine? Yeah, there's various ways of doing this. There's fancy force frames and things that are tens of thousands of pounds, but there's also these little things that are pretty cheap. They're not as good, they're not gold standard, but they're easy to get athletes through. So we would want to look at some kind of inner range hip flexion, so to look at how much force he's got front side, and we'd want to look at some outer range hip flexion. Is he strong enough to pull that through there and produce a lot of force there? So an inner range test would be, we'll go this leg at 90 degrees. You can do this in a force frame, and we're going to do a 6-second push to take a peak force. Okay, so I'm going to lock in here so you can't move. 3, 2, 1, push. Okay, and that will give us a reading on a phone app of his peak force. For an outer range example, we'll use this box. That box there, we'll use that box. Sorry. An outer range example, we need to look at, has he got the strength at length? So when his hip flexors are in a longer position. So mine's going to be on the bench. Come right to the end, so your knee's just there. So it's in neutral. So it's going to go into maximal hip flexion here and hold that. we probably would need to strap his shoulders down, because if he's really strong, he'll sit right up, or someone hold his shoulders. And essentially we'd do the same thing with that, flexing his hip from that extended position, okay? Has he got sufficient force? Has he got normal force, okay? So we like to see, thank you man, we like to see around, let's have a look. We won't be looking at above 50% body mass, really. There's not a lot of normative data in runners, but we've got quite a lot, because we just have a lot of runners here through the Talent Hub and the university program. So we want to generally see 50% plus, okay? And this athlete had quite a low hip flexion in outer range, but his inner range was quite good. So that would be an intervention we would put in place. We might put exercises such as, where's he gone? Oh, it's here. Have you got a box on the bench?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you do like 3 tests and then you average, or you do how many tests you?
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, you could probably just do 2 really. We
because
always
on
warm them
the
up and
app
things.
says like 3 tests.
Yeah.
But you 2 at least.
Yeah, at least 2. Yeah.
Alright.
So some interventions, because he is down. We know this athlete is down in hip flexion outer range. Would be. Do you mind if I stand on that? Don't do this at home. So I'm going to stand his foot. So some actual outer end hip flexion stuff. So he's holding his knee, and he's using his hip flexors to pull himself back. Okay. So that would be an example of some outer range stuff. Inner range would be some weight on the knee, bringing that up, or things like that, or some cable exercises. We won't show you everything. There's so many options, but just trying to think of. Show you some examples. I'm going to get through this here again. Sorry, guys. So that's our strength assessments for this athlete. That's what I think would be most valuable if we were only to do a few.
Sorry, what's the gadget called?
This is a handheld dynamometer. So there's various. This one is from Active Force. There's various brands out there. And so then the final test that I would like to layer on to get a good picture of his physical qualities would be some capacity testing. So I would want to see his endurance in his hip flexors. So Mai's over there ready to show me an anterior bunkie test. So this is like an anterior, we call it anterior power line, anterior bunkie test. He's in a plank, he's going to lift one leg off and just hold that position as long as he can. So this is telling us how much endurance he's got in this hip and through the trunk at this side as well, for there. And then the final one to put the whole puzzle together would be calf capacity. Okay, so we're looking at, has he got the elastic qualities on the jumps, has he got the peak force in the pushing, and has he got, but then can he repeat that? Has he got good endurance, localized endurance in his calf tissues? So we would do something like a single leg calf raise test to a metronome. Probably not using that, you're using a proper step, 2 fingers on the wall, and going up and down, maximum plantar flexion and maximum dorsiflexion to a metronome. And again, we're probably looking at someone very forward. Again, it's context. Some of the best athletes in the world are rubbish at calf raises, but it's context. Doesn't need to be good at calf raises. Well, he's very forefoot dominant, so he's probably going to be putting a lot of stress in the calf. So we might like him to be well in excess of 25 reps. To a metronome at 60 hertz, for example. Okay. And then my final slide before I move on to Mai is we've looked at the physical qualities now. We've looked at kinetics values, and we've addressed this. But we also then need to put this into run-specific interventions as well. Okay. So. For me, this athlete could be really strong in his hip flexors, really strong in his plantar flexors, very powerful, very elastic, and still he might be making these shapes that are maybe not advantageous, okay? So maybe it's a coordination thing. Maybe he just needs to be taught to move through these positions and things like that. Or maybe he has the force, but it doesn't have the velocity characteristics. So we might use things like, we're going to go from quite a general to specific approach with this. things like in his warm-up or whatever, rocket lunges I call them. So you might go into a lunge, long lunge, and then whip that knee through. Yeah, so he's working on the velocity of that hip flexion. We might do something like Mai's going to be over there, show us a reverse lunge to step up plus. Reverse lunge, whip that knee through, step through. Yeah, one more, Mai. Make it dynamic. Hey, there we go. So that might be, a drill that you can do in the gym-based environment to focus on switching the limbs quickly, but also driving that knee through into flexion and trying to stay away from the backside too much. We might use switching split squat jumps, so jumping in there and whipping through the air, things like that in his gym program. We may also use some band-resisted drills to really. Hold on a minute. So we might use some banded hip flexion to work on that velocity, but give him some progressive overload through his hip flexors. So we might use some knee drives, or we might then increase the speed by doing some boom booms in that position. Switch, fire it through, fire it through. Yeah, so there's some kind of drills that might be appropriate to this individual. And then from a running mechanic, so your traditional drills, okay, we've got a selection of drills, and the coaches will probably go through this more tomorrow in detail of how to coach these drills, cueing, what we're looking for in these drills. But this athlete, sorry, not this athlete, the athlete I'm talking about, he needs to focus on really front-side mechanics drills. So I would actually stay away from bounding, things like bounding like that, where he's going to emphasise kicking out the back too much. So I'd rather him do more hopping plyometrics, where he's going to pull it through and stay on one leg, hop through. Things over hurdles might be good for this athlete because it's going to encourage him to get that front-side mechanics. But dribble drills, cyclical dribble drills out the front might be good for him. Switching drills where he's just switching in front and rapidly exchanging his limbs, very good for this athlete. Boom booms, which are just switches, all in front. Piston drills, all the high knee family, all that kind of stuff, good for that athlete, anything front side. But we don't want to do backside kind of drills with him. And then getting really specific into running, the athlete might benefit from things like wicket runs, which is running over hurdles. So it's going to promote him getting his knees up quickly, so he doesn't catch the hurdle, and then smashing it back down really quickly, rather than leaving it behind. Okay, so because he's got to get it up before the next one. So if you've not seen a wicket drill before, there's a little video of Keely doing them down in South Africa, doing them very quickly. Actually, really nice front side shapes there. Okay. Right, over to Mai. Thank you very much. So Mai's going to run through another little assessment. We've obviously gone through the kilogram with myself, and Mai's going to go through another assessment.
Yeah, so we'll look at another case study, but we use the same kind of approach. So just a brief video of the athlete. So just have a look at what you see. Some of the good things, some not so good. I'll give you a clue, particularly for this one. We'll be focusing on the hip, okay, and the upper body. Okay, and just for this case study, just so you know, this athlete is running at 20 kilometers an hour, so just slightly slower than case study number 1. Okay, so again, we'll go through the kilogram method. We'll look at different positions. So toe off, as Dane mentioned, I won't spend too much time talking about this. You're looking at the projection angle, trunk angle as well. She's got good front side mechanics on this first kind of toe off position. We move on to the next one. Okay, we're looking at max vertical projection. Particularly, I want to focus on the opposite shoulder. You can almost see that coming through, which kind of indicates she's doing a bit more, too much rotation. Okay, so excessive rotation. Also want to look at her lower back. Okay, she's going into kind of lumbar lordosis. Okay, we need to look at the pelvis. There's definitely some anterior pelvic tilt there. And then we also look at the foot. Is it dorsiflex? Is it ready, pre-tense, ready for that ground contact? Just moving on. Again, we're looking at the thigh separation angle. She's got a bit less of a kind of lordotic curve at the back here. So she's corrected that a little bit. And then if we look at the touchdown, we got the same criteria. So we're looking at the inclination of the trunk, okay, pelvis position, separation between the thighs. We're looking at the shank angle, whether the knee is directly above the ankle, what kind of position is the foot, okay, and what's the distance between where the foot kind of contacts the ground and the center of mass. And lastly, this is actually quite an important one for this athlete, okay, we want to look at the mid stance, okay, this is where the athlete experiences the highest kind of ground reaction forces, okay, particularly we want to focus on around the hip, okay, is there any kind of hip drop, all right, and what is the kind of the knee angle here, is it quite flexed or quite stiff, and then we're also looking at the foot and how the athlete makes kind of contact and what position it's in a mid stance, okay. Ideally, so Dane showed a video of a different kind of point of view with case study number 1 looking at the foot. Ideally for this athlete we would like to see kind of similar point of view but just higher up so we can see what the hips are doing as well, okay, and in terms of kind of the upper body and what's happening there with kind of excessive rotation, it would also be good to kind of see it from a bird's eye view as well from the top and use the shoulders as a guide to see how much rotation is happening there. Okay, we actually didn't have that set up, so we can't really show you that, but that would be a good consideration maybe for next time. Okay, so based on kind of the kinematic analysis, so we kind of, you can see that there was kind of lack of lumbopelvic control, okay, which was evident by excessive lumbar extension, which then also puts the pelvis into anterior tilt. Okay, this was evident both in the toe off and max vertical projection. Okay, and then we also saw that there was excessive trunk rotation, okay, of the upper body, which is evident by the opposite shoulder and the arm during the max vertical projection point. Okay, and then so these two are very easy to identify during the kinematic analysis. So using the video, the visuals, and all that. Okay, this last one, okay, is more related to the mid stance, but we'll also look at it in detail from a more of a kinetic point of view, okay, so biomechanical kind of data, okay, but you can see there's lack of vertical stiffness and ability to resist deformation, okay, during that mid stance, which was evident by the hip drop and kind of excessive knee flexion, okay, at that stage. So we'll move on to the next slide. So we'll look at some kinetic data. Overall, I think the left side is probably slightly, it's not as good as the right side, I would say. So if we look at leg stiffness, for example, okay, she is actually below the norm on both sides, but particularly on the left side, okay. So that could indicate that she's not as efficient on the ground during that mid stance, perhaps. Okay, or just because stiffness might be low doesn't mean that she's not producing force. Maybe she's just being less efficient because she's using more contractile elements like the muscles and stuff like that, which is less efficient, less economical. Okay, also important consideration. If we just move on to the next one, okay, if we look at contact duration, she's actually spending a bit too much time on the ground. Okay, so especially on this left side here, compared to the norms. If we then look at, okay, what could that tell us? Okay, so she's spending more time on the ground here, gives her a bit more time to produce more force, more propulsive force, horizontal propulsive force, okay, which means that her step length is then higher on the left compared to the right. Okay, sorry, keep touching that, same reason. And because the step length is probably not where it should be compared to the norms, if you look at her cadence, on average she takes about 5 more steps than someone else might do over the same distance over the same time. Okay, at that speed. That makes sense. Okay? So if we move on to kind of the physical profiling, so we've done the assessments, okay, we've gone through the kinematic and kinetic data, okay, now we'll go through looking at range of motion, so does the athlete have sufficient mobility to achieve the required positions? Again, this is what Dane's gone through already. You know, is she capable of expressing force within the time constraints? Okay, and can she even produce enough force for the demands of running? Okay, with each step, and then does she have the capacity to repeat that over and over and over again? Very, very kind of important for endurance athletes. Okay, so if we look at individual assessments, okay, I'm going to get Dane to help out with this one. So in terms of range of motion, okay, because she was in that kind of lordotic position, okay, out the back here, okay, and we're looking at that pelvis and anterior tilt, we want to see what her hip extension is like. Does she have the range of motion of the hip, or does she compensate by maybe over rotating and getting that pelvis tucked? Okay, so what we're looking for is we'll get that into autonomous position, and we'll do an assessment. See how flexible the hip flexors are. Okay, so we'll look at this side here. You can see. So he's going to grab one shin, pull it to himself as far as possible. Okay, and then he's trying to relax this foot as much as possible. We're then going to place this goniometer right here, and we're going to measure. Okay, we'll go here, first one. Okay, so you're looking at the hip. Okay, trying to align this with the shoulders, and then align this with the knee. And ideally, okay, we're actually happy if they're in kind of neutral, so where the hip and the knee are the same line, or aligned. Or if the knee is slightly lower than the hip, that means they can get into hip extension. Okay? If we look at the next one, we're going to look at dynamic force. Okay? So we're going to look at the knee extensors, okay, their force capabilities, and are they able to produce force quickly, and how well. So to do this, we probably get the athlete to do a bilateral kind of movement jump first. We get some baseline kind of numbers to see how high they can jump, how powerful they are. Okay, so our target, for example, for this athlete would be between 25 and 30 centimeters plus. Okay, ideally. Once we have that, we'll then see if there's any asymmetry between left and right. So we'll do single leg kind of movement jumps. Same thing, good. And then the standards for those are, we want to see that to be greater than half of what the bilateral kind of jump was. So if they jump 40 centimeters with double leg, okay, we want to see 20 centimeters or more on each leg with that. Okay? Any questions so far?
These counter movements and targets, do you calculate that by flight time or by impulse? Because there is some differences.
Usually flight time.
Flight
Yeah,
time,
usually
okay.
flight time. But
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of debate in the
Yeah.
in the literature, but we don't heavily get into that too much. I think that nuance is quite detailed.
Yeah.
But initially, before we had force plates, we could only calculate from flight time. You know, we're using a MyJump app or we're using a jump mat. So yeah, depends what you've got, really, doesn't it? But, good question. Very detailed question.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on to the next kind of focus. So we'll look at strength. So as we can see with the athlete, they're in mid stance. Okay, there's quite a bit of knee flexion. Okay, that's fine. Ideally, we would change the setup for Dane just to suit the angles and everything. But you're roughly looking at 135 degrees at the knee joint. Okay, there we go. And then he's going to push against something that's immovable, so that bar. And the protocol is quite similar to what I did previously for the ankle isometric as well. Okay, just the position is slightly different. And for that, we'd like to see 3.5 times body weight or more. Okay, so we try and make that relative to the individual. And then if we look at, we want to look at hip abduction as well. Okay, so there was some kind of hip drop evident there, so we want to see glute medius strength. So we get there in the position.
We'll go. There's two positions.
Okay, well, we'll show you both. So, you're gonna hold on to the side so you get some help. Okay, legs nice and straight. Okay, I'll put the handheld down device here, and all I'm gonna ask him to do is kick towards me. Okay, ready, push. Good, nice and easy. There's another one you can do if he flips over to his side.
Some people might prefer this position, you know, in terms of we do both, don't we?
Yeah.
Just to look at the values. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. So nice, this leg's nice up. Okay, so I'm gonna place my hand on his hip. Okay, he's got this leg in nice position. I'm going to hold the handheld dyno here, and he's going to kick up towards me as far as he can, and then we're going to measure how strong he is in that position. Okay? So for that one, okay, we're looking at over 60% body weight as a standard, as a good standard. Okay, again, it's all relative to the individual. And then we'll move on to the capacity. So we'll see how strong and durable their kind of glute medius or hip abductors are, and then we'll also look at the trunk as well. So the abduction side plank, please.
Yep. So standard for this is a 30 centimetre box.
There we go, already set up. And then they're just going to hold that position as long as possible. We then monitor the hips drop and stuff like that, and we'll tell them to stop. Okay? So the standard for this is over 30 seconds. It's a lot more difficult than it looks. Okay? And then we got the supine hold. So very simple, all the way on the edge. Okay? Then we'll lay across the legs, and they're just going to lean back into a nice straight position, and you're going to hold that for as long as possible. Okay? They achieve that over 60 seconds. It's a really good standard. And then we'll just flip them over, test the posterior chain. Same thing, all the way to the edge, lay across their feet, and hold that position. Okay? People tend to do this for a bit longer, so our standard is 90 seconds or more. Okay? And I need to find them out.
And again, there's a lot of nuance around these standards, a lot of context depending on event, males, females, etc., etc.
So we've looked at kind of gym-based interventions and testing. We now want to move into kind of run-specific interventions as well. So
you might need a bit of space here.
yeah, just a bit of space so we can demo everything. So looking at coordination and lumbar-pelvic control. So focusing on the hip and the trunk. I'll let Dane do the lumbar-pelvic control progression. So I'll just ask him to get into a nice kind of dead bug position. Okay, and first level one is just simple. Can he tilt that pelvis from posterior to anterior? Okay, nice and simple. There we go. So once he's past that, we can move on to the next one. So we'll ask him to raise his legs into a 90 position. There we go. And then arms up as well. And then he's going to do a dead bug. So he's going to alternate. Okay, he's trying to keep that lower back on the ground. He's tugged that pelvis under, maintain that position. So we're just adding a bit of kind of challenge and complexity to it. Next one, do you want to do double arm, alternate legs? There we go, nice and easy. And then last one is just an alekna, so all limbs go out and come back in, keeping that position. Okay, and then we got some drills. This is where it gets interesting. So we'll go. Where do you put it down? Oh, there. So if you want to emphasize and give the athlete a bit of external feedback around the hip and where the position is when they're doing drills, put the band directly on the hip, have someone hold the band behind them, okay? Make sure they tug the pelvis under, okay? And then they can do either static drills or dynamic, moving forward, okay? But it just gives them that extra external feedback, okay? Where the pelvis is relative to the rest of the body. Right, or you can make it a bit more complex and challenging. Okay, this is about rib cage, keeping that rib cage down, and then do a drill. Same thing.
What we'll do? Just I'll do the
Just
same.
same thing. There we go. Yeah, so this is quite challenging. Okay, so we're just progressing it. We go from simple to a bit more challenging and complex. Okay, but we're also targeting different kind of aspects. So our first one was around the hip. Second one a bit more trunk. Okay, and ability to brace and keep that position. Okay, then we'll move on to some drills with upper body constraints. So we'll grab a med ball. Again, same thing, similar to this one. Okay, if you hold the med ball in front of you, you're bracing, you're holding that rib cage down. You're not going to have that excessive flare at the back. Okay, you're not going to tilt that pelvis anteriorly. So good brace. Okay, and then do a couple of switches. There we go. So kind of limiting contribution from the upper body and just focusing on the lower body and the pelvis as well, okay?
Hard to run with as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It increases the demand of the abdominals to keep everything going forwards as the external load.
So you can do the same thing with a dowel. You can have one onto your back, at the front. It also gives you a little bit of feedback of how much rotation is happening when they're actually doing drills. Yes.
So this question can be done with a broomstick, for example, tell the athletes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely fine, yeah. Broomstick down,
Broomstick across here,
Across
here,
here.
on the back, resist, yeah, absolutely.
over it, yeah. Just challenge them in different positions. And then we'll just move on to the last bit. So we're going to focus on kind of hip lock emphasis. So first one, we always start with just teaching them the positions and how it should feel. So we say kind of dip here, okay, and then bring that other side of the pelvis higher than the other one, okay, and just hold that, okay. Once they're familiar with that, we'll go up to here, okay. Add a bit of resistance, okay, slight angle, same thing, and push. You might hold that, push as hard as you can, relax, okay, and then same thing. You can add a little complexity to it, okay, with a little switch, okay, make it more dynamic. And then you can also
Oh, lateral.
okay, so when you're doing drills,
Just your boom, yeah.
yeah, I'm standing perpendicular. Sorry.
Alright, right.
Okay, there we go. That just forces him to get that hip lock position when he sticks. There we go. You can do that static, you can do it moving. Okay. Another one I like to do as well is once you're in that hip lock position, okay, you can do this and then swap, swap, swap. Okay, so you're focusing on keeping that position nice and strong. Okay, and then you progress those to 8 switches and just add complexity as you go along. Okay, so very simple, okay, and slow. Get in the right positions and progress the speed and the complexity of the drills. Okay. Thank you very much.